Well, my first memories are, see, we grew up in the big house on the corner, in the brick house on the corner. And my first memories are running to the far end, which is on the, would be the east side of the building, and then running into the kitchen, lickety-split, and sliding on a, she didn't have braided rugs in those days, she had
Rag rugs?
rag rugs, and sliding. And whoa, boy, we'd scream and yell, and then my brother did it, and the stove, he slid into the leg of Mom's gas stove, and the stove went shoo right over him, and everybody yelled. And yeah, Lee can still remember that. And then I remember him going up the steps into the attic area to plant a tulip. Must have been for the spring of the year, because they learned in school that tulips grew from bulbs. So he went up every day and watered this light bulb in the dirt. And and I yelled at my mother, "He's doing it again, Mom!" And she went over there, and then she had to explain to him that you had to have special bulbs for that. You didn't just plant a bulb.
Oh, did he plant a light bulb?
A light bulb. And yeah, and so he didn't do that anymore. But we used to play up in that attic. Boy, that was terrific. But you never got up on too far on this east side of the building, because it was really dark and scary. It was dark and scary, and I never thought about it at the time, but that must have been where all the, see, when they moved into town from the farm, they must have brought all their precious papers. And what are your precious papers? Your citizenship, your application for this. They went through all that, but they stored it in a big box. And then a lot of it was in German, so we kids never really looked at it. And it's a shame, because then when Jean and Bill ended up buying that building, or taking it over, she just had workmen come and clear everything out. And the only way that we found that, somebody came into the store and said, "Neat, do you know your family pictures are all down at the dump?" And my mother was horrified. She said, "What?" And so when Jean came, they took over the building, so we didn't bother them in the building, but she went down to the dump and picked out a lot of these old pictures were down there at the dump,
Okay.
getting ready to burn.
Who bought the building? Jean and
Bill Kann. It would have been Jean Uttenhoff and Bill Kann. And,
okay, so the brick building that you're referring to
next door,
is
yes.
the Cafe 1858. That's
Yeah.
where you grew up and lived, and then
Upstairs.
you lived upstairs.
Yeah.
And did your parents have a store downstairs?
No, that would have been Grandpa Kann that had the store downstairs.
Okay, and what kind of a store was it?
General merchandise. He sold everything. And then they used to, that's where they planned Lakeside. The fellow would come up, he knew somebody that was good at fitting woods, and I can't remember what that guy's name was, but he knew how to make walnut fit tight to pine, and
Sure.
and knew how to fit them. And so they'd often sit there and discuss how they would do a floor, you know, a dance floor. And so that's how then Lakeside got started. But there was
So they would meet in the store over there down below and
down
visit.
below.
Okay.
feet up on the stove and sit. And Grandpa Kann always smoked a cigar. And that building was built by Fleck. Wasn't built by the Cans. That was built by Fleck, and he also built that warehouse across the street.
So growing up, did you, was there it seems like my dad would refer to, tell me about the catwalk first. Was there a catwalk that went around the building, or like you don't remember that?
No, not a catwalk, but you see, after, let's see, we lived up there, that was a lovely home up there. It was a big kitchen, a great big closet in the corner for
Mhm.
kids with all their toys. We just stacked everything in the closet, and then if we were supposed to be distracted, we'd just go in and pick out any kind of a toy to play with. Everything was
How
in.
many brothers and sisters did you have?
Did I have? In those days, it was just Lee and I.
Okay.
Steve came later, after he moved here. So there was a kitchen, and then there was a lovely dining room, and that table that they had seated all the kids. All the kids around the table.
So, did you have more than one family living up there, or just?
Well, see, Grandpa had Sonny was the first one.
Okay, so there's probably, what, 3 generations of people living there?
Yeah.
Then? Okay.
And so you can imagine what my mother and Dad got married, and then he moved her in there. Permanent disagreement with her folks, who figured he just married her for a house girl. But that's really what she ended up to be, because people would come in and they'd eat, what you got for your food, you know, and that was their home, so she had moved into their home.
Okay,
And
so living in the house before your mother and father got married was his
family.
his parents and his brothers and sisters.
Yeah. You know, we used to sit in those windows upstairs. We'd sit on the radiator. There was a foot-high radiator under each one of those windows upstairs, and you'd take a board and wrap it with a towel or something, and then you could sit on that board, and you were cozy as ever, and the only protection you had was the shutters.
Shutters.
If you
keep
pulled
you
the
from-
shutters shut, yeah, you would, it stayed cool up there all the time. It was very, very comfortable. But then there was a dining room, and then there was a music room, because Grandpa Kann liked music. And so he would just buy the kids any kind of instruments they wanted, and they stacked them in the music cases around 3 sides of that room. And so the music was just it was just full of violin, all kinds of musical instruments. That's why they all grew up. They knew how to play anything, and they could play any kind of song or anything. And then
Ever have a family band?
no. Well, I shouldn't say that. By that time, they started growing up and leaving home, so they didn't actually have a family band as such. But Dad was, he wanted to play music so badly, and in his lifetime, and so he had enough. Dad had enough credits to graduate in 3 years down here at school, but the priest wouldn't let him graduate. So the public school principal was there, and he said, well, if you want to graduate, he says, you come on up to public school and we'll let you graduate. So he went up to the public school and actually graduated, which only kind of made the priest kind of anxious then, because, you know, your students are leaving you. And so he graduated, and then he went, they thought he should go to school in college. And so he said yes, as long as he could stop on weekends and play for the bands. And yeah, you can do that, till he got down there, and then he found out that Loris didn't even have a music department. And so
He never did go then.
he went, but he was already signed up for it. But then he got a notice from a dance band, And he thought, hey, this is for me. And so, yeah, so that's when he went on his Far Eastern trip. Went out to Washington. And this is where the, this picture is where the import shop is setting now.
Okay, so that was always a vacant lot?
It was just a vacant lot,
Okay.
yeah. They used to play with, the kids all played there. There's Carl, Lee, May, and Bus. And they had a goat, and they crawled him up on the stack of boxes. And there's that nanny goat. He's way up on top. And I like when I did these, I wrote in there what they would say to the kids.
So did you have to work in the general store, or?
No, I was too young then. By the time I was about 3 or 4, Mom just couldn't take it anymore. She had so much commotion around her, so he went to his mother, Dad went to his mother and said, you know, we've got this vacant lot here. Maybe I could build a little building there, and then we could move down into this house. And then I could do something in that building. And so she gave him permission, and then they built that. Now, and I was looking in here earlier, trying to find out because he went up to Tilly Harris again, and all the carpenters were sitting around out in front waiting for work, you know. And Dad says, well, I'd have some work for you, but I don't have any money. Oh, that's all right, Carl, what do you need? So they built that building. They tore down the old barn and built that building with the worn out lumber from the old barn. Yeah, and so he got that building started. Oh, can you imagine here? I always look at this picture here of the snow and ice on the river. Look at how the river used to freeze up.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then that's the warehouse, the back of the warehouse.
Okay,
So
you guys could go quite a ways out.
oh, and then Grandpa Kann was a good one to have stuff around for the kids to play with. He built a toboggan. This was a toboggan of a toboggan. I bet it was as long as from here to there. And you steered it with a steering wheel. And so the front end, somebody had to always steer it, and then you steered it, and then kids would jump on the back, and we'd ride for 2 blocks and hop off, and then we'd keep going. And my mother pulled us with, now they used to push that down onto the river, but after a bit, they had no way to get it. It was so big and heavy. So Mom got her, I think it was an old Ford. She got into the Ford car, and we hooked it onto the back of the car, and she pulled that. Now I can't imagine, the street would be icy, and she's pulling this thing with, and so
Kids on it.
with kids on it, and you had to be careful because you had to know when to put the brake on. Otherwise, you'd run into the back of the car. Oh, we rode that thing all over. It was more darn fun.
Do you have any pictures of that toboggan?
No, I never. It sat in our garage out here for years, and then we finally tore it apart. And
What was it made of? Probably walnut or?
oh, it was all.
Any
Well,
kind
the
of wood.
board that went down, that was a great big. There weren't 2 boards. It was one
big
long
slat, yeah.
slab.
So when they built this house, I just want to clarify this. When they built the house that was the original import shop, it was a vacant lot, but it had a barn on it. The carpenters tore down the barn and then reused the wood from the barn
Yeah,
to build the house.
here's where the import shop is. This
Okay.
is that vacant yard.
Okay, okay.
And now he got, I didn't find out until years later, because he died before I was born. I was born in 35 and he died in 32,
Grandpa did?
Grandpa.
Okay.
And so I never knew him. but I'd only hear the stories about him. And I think he died of prostate cancer. He couldn't urinate. He came back from Rochester. He went up to Rochester, came back with his hair absolutely white because he was in so much pain he couldn't urinate. And finally, I don't know what doctor it would have been, but the doctor came down and just stuck a knife in his belly to relieve the urine. And he heaved a sigh of relief as the urine ran out, and he just said goodbye.
And that was it.
And that was it. This is where we used to sneak out on the side here and collect snow. From the first snows would come by, you'd make an eggnog out of that. You'd put an egg in that and stir that up with that snow in there, and put a little sweetener on it, honey or something, and yeah, that was very good. And I watch these little girls over here next door play with their scooter, and the handlebars, one has a gripper and the other's just plain metal. The gripper was torn off or broken off. That's where I got nipped.
Oh, really?
On my bicycle. My father got me a bicycle, I suppose from some guy, some grocery man or something coming to. And so I had a bicycle, and boy, I'd race up and down the alleyway with that bicycle. And then Mom yelled at him, she should have grippers on both handles. Both handles. Well, I slipped one time and caught the end, right on the end. And now let's see. She bandaged everything with Kann salve. And so I always had a little lump there. So it just peeled the skin back. And yeah, once he died, everything just kind of fell apart. And the boys weren't really trained to do anything. So they kind of fought over Lakeside. Oh, we figured out where it got its name the other day, Lakeside. There was an old road from the mainland to the island, and so that formed a kind of a lake. And so that's where they got the name Lakeside.
So did your grandfather then, was he the one that built Lakeside? Or okay,
Yeah.
okay, and that was before you were born.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Kann salve. So what was in Kann salve?
All vegetables with a base of lard. You see, those recipes came from the old country, and so where you didn't have so many doctors, so they made it all the time. The kids used to come in the back door and, hey, look, I got a sore. So they'd put some Kann salve on and a Band-Aid and cover it up. It took the pain out right away. Look at this, this one here. This is that lower park down there. Look how there are no trees.
Oh yeah, you could play baseball down there.
Yeah,
There's
we
a lot of
did.
room.
We were always throwing balls at each other or something or other, baseball. But then the girls couldn't play with the boys, so they'd boot you away. This must have been before, because I went down and checked on that stone down there, and that stone was dropped off in 36, I think. And there's no stone down there now, or there's no stone on this picture.
So did you yourself go to school at St. Mary's or public school?
St. Mary's.
So what was that like?
Uneventful, really.
Who was the priest at the time?
Gee, I don't even remember.
So it was kind of an uneventful.
Probably Father DuPont.
I bet it was. Oh, and we go roller skating down there around his house, because that was the only smooth sidewalk any place in town. and he'd come running out and shaking his fist at us, get back. Well, he came from a rather important family from Dubuque.
So did you go all 12 years at St. Mary's?
Yes. And I was terribly bored. By the time I got into high school, I was just bored. I didn't think about going to college, except Elaine Schutte came up and she says she was getting signed up for Iowa City. She says, come on, Barb, we'll go together. And I said, well, I don't know. She kind of coaxed. Well, I said, okay. But by the time it got time to go, she had decided not to go. And so, but I thought, oh, well, I'll go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see, by that time, this place was started about 47. Because Dad says, we got the building, we got to do something with it. You know, he used to make caramel corn in here too, in the old grocery store.
Really?
That table over there is the marble where Mom used to roll her fudge out.
Oh,
See,
neat.
yeah, that's still there. We had the, he saw an ad for a caramel corn store, I think he said Alcator. So he went up and got all the equipment, and then you'd mix your syrup. Oh, he had a beautiful big copper tub, brown. He'd mix the sugar and whatever it was in there, and then you rolled it out on a big, inside a big case, glass case with a steel on top of it, and on top of the counter. And then he'd pop the popcorn, and then you had to do it real quickly or the popcorn would catch on fire. And so he dumped that popcorn into that great big container, and he'd stir it real fast, and then he'd pour it out onto the, and then he'd have to break it apart so it didn't stick. So he had to have a big paddle, and he'd have to break that all apart. We sold a lot of caramel corn.
So when you're talking about the shop, are you talking about the brick building your dad had a shop in there, or was that
no.
in here now?
No, they were always afraid to do that because it was always family owned.
Okay, so
And
they started separately here at the import shop, and originally what was the import shop then? Just kind of
It was a grocery store.
grocery store.
Yeah, grocery store. And we sold everything,
And that was your parents.
my folks.
Okay.
And we...
And that you probably worked in.
Oh, always. He kept me real busy in the grocery store, but mostly Lee. We'd sit on the ice cream case and then eat. What were those? That ice cream from years ago, Meadow Gold ice cream. You'd sit there and eat ice cream. It got so we didn't even want to eat the cone anymore. We just stick it in a glass or a cup and then eat it from there. But I remember specifically on that side, on the south side of that wall, we had all the cigarettes. And cigarettes and tobacco. And I think it was the Horseman sisters would come in. One was real tall and the other one was real short. And so Lee pushed me into it. He says, now you go tell them they're going to want to buy tobacco, chewing tobacco. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, you go on, tell them. It's 14 cents. He says, they won't have it. You make them stick to 14 cents for that Copenhagen. And so the little gal did all the talking and the big gal never said anything. And so the short gal, she said, how much? I said, 14 cents. And she said, she looked up at the big tall gal and she said, okay. They nodded. All right. Okay, here's 14 cents. So she finally gave me the 14 cents and then I gave her the Copenhagen. Those poor gals, they must have died with no teeth. I never thought about that.
Yeah, well, maybe they never had any to begin with at that point. Well, they lived a
And
long
comic
time,
books.
didn't they?
There, yeah. There was a guy sitting out, I was sitting out in front the other day, and the guy looked into the window and he says, "Hey, I used to buy all my comic books in here." I said, "Yep, we had them all up on that one wall over there. Every kind of magazine you could imagine, and comic books galore." But I said the difficult part was we had to read every comic book before we could sell it. I mean, you know, you're not gonna sell this magazine and not know what the comics are. So we'd make a point when we got new comic books in, we'd have to get down and pick over them to see which ones we wanted to look at. And yeah, and then there was no, that wasn't joined to this house. You know, that was a separate building. So I don't know who they were trying to accommodate, but they built, I told you this the other day, they built the stairway between these buildings here. That's where you walk down that step here, and there was nothing there. It was all outdoors. We opened this all up afterward. So the stairway went up to the roof of the import shop, and then went up a few more steps, and then there was a nice flat, I don't know who they would get to build that on top of the import shop, and then down into the door. And that's what that door is. It always bothers me when there are doors here, windows there. What were they originally? Yeah, well, that was, and Charlotte used to suntan herself up there.
Okay, so Lenchen and Herman and Joe eventually lived above in the brick building.
In the brick building, yeah, front apartment.
So then that must have been what he was talking about, like a catwalk that went outside. The stairs went outside
I bet
and
it
up on
was.
the roof.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the catwalk,
okay.
yeah. And then I could lay up there and hear Charlotte, and she went with a reverend's son. Can't remember what his name was, but she was such a pretty girl. And Frazee or
Walt Frazee?
Walt Frazee, yeah. And he did radio work over in the warehouse. And but she was Catholic, and he was a minister's son. And so they could never get together. And so she finally, I forget, did she go off to school or something? I lost track of her then.
I think she went to Clark.
Clark.
So when did your parents decide to do the import end of things? At what point did they get interested in that?
Dad was drafted, and he was one of the older draftees. He was about 37, 38 years old when they drafted him in the Second World War. And he was very disillusioned with his music. He just couldn't seem to find a band to get into, or he couldn't find a way of expressing himself with the music. So he packed his music away in the attic up here, and we never heard him play his saxophone or anything. And he had a biggie. He had one big saxophone. Oh God! Here, look at that thing.
Oh, that is a big, what do they call that, a baritone?
I don't know. He had that when he was down at Loris.
Okay, so he was drafted in the war. What part of the army, probably?
The Navy.
Or the Navy.
Yeah, he was disillusioned with his music, so they needed Navy men at those times.
Okay, so he was
And,
drafted.
yeah, no, you were drafted and you went to wherever they
Okay.
needed you. And so then he went to school for a while down at Ames to learn the electrical. And I can remember he and Mom arguing over why didn't he continue with his music. He says, I'm finished with music. It ain't gonna do it for us. he went down there.
And
I
was
can
that
remember
to-
standing in the store, and he sold that thing.
The
That big-
saxophone?
Yeah, and a guy came in years later and said, you know, I'm the one who bought Carl's big old saxophone. He says, it just made me sick that I didn't keep it. So, yeah, 'cause it would be a big, heavy sound. And, so I don't know whatever happened to that big saxophone.